I'm Scott Kahn, and this is the Orthodox Conundrum. Later this week, we'll celebrate Rosh Hashanah, also known as the Day of Remembrance, Yom HaZikaron. According to Chazal, Hashem, so to speak, remembers us on this day for the good. And we too should look at those people who set sterling examples for us over the past year and to try to learn from their incredible example. One of those people whose life was exemplary was Gavriel Bloom, zichrono, livracha. In the shul where I daven on Shabbat, two of us are saying Kaddish. I'm saying it for my father, and David Bloom, who sits right behind me, is saying it for his son Gavriel, who was killed on January 8th during a mission in central Gaza. Gavriel was the second of David and Jennifer Bloom's 6 children. He was born in Kfar Saba and raised in Beit Shemesh. Gavriel was 27 years old and just about to start his 4th and final year of mechanical engineering studies when he answered the call on the morning of October 7th. He immediately joined his reserve platoon, an elite unit of the Combat Engineering Corps, prior to being officially called up. Within hours, the team that he commanded was already on the northern border in order to meet an expected attack on that second front, and in order to prepare for the entry of his battalion into the area. During his weeks on the northern border, his unit carried out missions to secure the area from incursions. Soon after, at the beginning of the IDF's ground maneuver into Gaza, Gavriel's unit was separated from the battalion and chosen for the specific mission of destroying enemy infrastructure above and below ground. Along with actual infantry fighting and paving the way for larger units to enter new areas, Gavriel's platoon, in which Gavriel was a commander, cleared buildings and tunnels. His platoon, which was nicknamed Star 3600, was not only tasked to destroy the enemy infrastructure, but also to literally write the book on how it should be done. Gavriel developed unique expertise in implementing, streamlining, and activating the assets at their disposal, which, by the way, are still classified. And he was able to leverage his creativity, experience, and engineering background to help develop the methods that are now the standard in Gaza. During his time in Gaza, Gavriel participated in many missions in Divisions 36, 98, and 162. He was involved in underground missions, including the destruction of tunnels, as well as intelligence missions. Gavriel was killed in an explosion near Al-Barej at the underground Hamas factory for long-range missiles, when another unit's explosives were prematurely detonated. 6 soldiers were killed in the explosion, 2 from Gavriel's platoon and 4 from the other unit operating in the area. David wrote up a series of remembrances and lessons that we can all learn from Gavriel's life. On today's podcast, David will begin by reading the words that he composed. After that, David and I have a conversation about Gavriel. We also delve into some serious and painful social topics, such as the general ultra-Orthodox refusal to serve in the IDF, as well as some very troubling trends of which this is only one part. Rosh Hashanah is a time to reflect on the past year, which has unquestionably been one of the most fraught and difficult years that many of us have ever experienced. I'm honored that David was generous enough to share his thoughts and memories of Gavriel with me and with you. I don't think that there could be a more meaningful way to go into this coming Rosh Hashanah.
Gavriel was always a friendly and well-liked kid, but up until the end of the 10th grade, he was comparatively small. Among the tight-knit group of friends and neighbors that he grew up with, his size didn't matter, but he really loved playing basketball. And as we all know, in basketball, height is paramount. In school, he would skip lunch in order to show up first to the basketball court during recess. But he was never chosen for a team. As a father, it is heartbreaking when your child tells you that he is stuck on the outside looking in. Gavriel was frustrated and sad, but he was never angry, bitter, or resentful. So he practiced his basketball skills and fine-tuned other skills, interpersonal ones. He refined his amazing sense of humor and developed a unique, inclusive presence. The party didn't start until Gavriel showed up. To understand Gavriel, it is important to mention that he was more than a little bit ADHD, which put him at a disadvantage in the classroom. After discovering, the hard way, that cutting corners wasn't going to reap the success he desired, he developed a strong work ethic. He took his work seriously, set goals, and went beyond what was required. Gavriel epitomized what is said during the naming of a newborn boy, Ze hakatan gadol yiyeh. Now he is small, but he will achieve greatness. By the time Gavriel was in his junior year of high school, he wasn't just physically larger, gadol, than he had been, but also gadol, mature, because he had developed so much as a person. Oftentimes, you hear individuals speak out against the plague of bullying, but really, these same individuals are just opposed to being the object of bullying. And we see that when the tables are turned and these same individuals find themselves in positions of power and influence, they become the worst perpetrators of bullying. They don't display any compassion for the marginalized. Gavriel went out of his way to be inclusive in any milieu that he found himself. During the Shiva, a friend of Gavriel's named Shmuel told us that he moved to Beit Shemesh during high school, but remained a student in Jerusalem. On Shabbat evening, he felt alone and lonely and decided to go for a walk in the neighborhood. Shmuel noticed a group of friends hanging out and enjoying one another's company, and he stopped to watch. Shmuel found himself on the outside looking in. Gavriel immediately noticed and walked over to introduce himself and then introduced Shmuel to the rest of the group. But it didn't stop there. Shmuel became entirely included in the group of friends because of Gavriel's keen attention to caring about others. The teen daughter of a guest that we hosted when Gavriel had just finished his mandatory service in the IDF wrote to us when she heard what happened to Gavriel the following anecdote. I want to tell you a little bit about what I remember from the day we came over for dinner. It was Israel Independence Day. At the time, I really hated living in Israel, and I remembered being in the worst mood and wanting to go back to America. The second we walked in, you were all so welcoming. When we sat at the table, I sat next to Gavriel and his friend, who was also a guest. I don't remember the specifics of our conversation, but they somehow managed to do the impossible and make me happy. They were fun to be around and really made my day. It was the most I remember smiling, laughing, and just having fun in such a long time. I remember leaving the meal thinking, if everyone here was more like Gavriel and his friends, maybe I would like it more in Israel. And that's what I really wanted to tell you. Gavriel was the kind of person that after I left the meal, I found myself wishing that I could find more people like him. He was so kind and happy to speak to me. He gave me his full attention. The young son of friends of ours was going through a very difficult time with his parents, and he requested that Gavriel be his babysitter when his parents went out. He wrote to us this story. I wasn't in a good place with my parents, and as they were leaving, they warned me to behave and not make a mess. When Gavriel showed up, he immediately understood the situation. We moved all of the furniture and played with Nerf guns until I was too tired to go on. Gavriel told me that since we made a mess, we needed to set things straight so that my parents wouldn't notice. We worked to return the house to its pristine state. I don't have a lot of memories from that period in my life, except that Gavriel had a huge heart. Gavriel taught me that Zehakatan Gadol Yiyeh, now he is small, but he will achieve greatness, isn't just regulated to childhood. He showed me that we all have our ups and downs in life, but retain the capacity to continue growing to even more greatness. Everyone has those family stories that are embarrassing, that either they don't want to explain or they are afraid will put the family or one of the family members in a bad light. So they decide just to keep them a secret. Who wants to ruin the image of a perfect family with perfect kids? We had a story like that with Gavriel that we did not intend to share. But then we asked Gavriel's best friend, Yosef, to give a eulogy at Gavriel's funeral, and he shared the story in his hesped. As we say during the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, Lefanecha niglu kol hata'alumot v'nistarot mibreshit. Before you there are no secrets. All is revealed since the beginning of time. Gavriel's friend Yosef served, and still serves, as a reservist in Yahalom, an elite combat engineering unit. Gavriel also served originally in Yahalom, and according to his commanders and fellow soldiers, he was a first among equals. He worked hard and excelled. Jennifer once asked Gavriel how he was able to succeed under such difficult circumstances, and he answered that when they are given a mission, everyone else puts their focus on the first obstacle, and then the next, and then the next after that. So by the middle of the mission, they are already exhausted, physically and mentally, whereas Gavriel from the outset put his sights on the final obstacle. During his time in Yahalom, Gavriel was rewarded for his excellence with some days off on a base in Petach Tikva, while the rest of the unit went out into the field for military exercises. But the reward came with one condition: he couldn't leave the base. So what do you do when you're 19 years old, in an elite unit, and feeling untouchable, when someone offers you tickets to the premiere of Batman vs. Superman at a special showing not particularly far from base? You guessed it. He left the base to attend the premiere. At first, when he was caught, his immediate superiors were unhappy but willing to overlook the transgression. But then the order from the higher-ups was that a reliability issue like this could not be excused, and he was officially removed from the unit. For those of you who are not familiar, the IDF doesn't send people from elite units back to the regular Army infantry units. It seems to be some sort of honor thing. Even though someone has been expelled, they shouldn't have to experience the embarrassment of me'igra rama labira amikta, from experiencing life on high to living a life of humiliation. So Gavriel was offered staff roles in the Corps, or special courses to become an instructor, just to avoid facing the degradation. But Gavriel wasn't having any of that. He had drafted to serve his country in the most significant way possible, and wasn't willing to just tread water and pass the time until the end of his service. He had experienced a tremendous setback, a major blow to his pride. Nevertheless, he decided to join a regular combat engineer infantry unit as a basic soldier. Gavriel had his ideals, and he absolutely wasn't willing to sacrifice them in order to avoid embarrassment. He was willing to start again at the bottom and work his way back to the top. Zeh hakatan gadol yiyeh. He was brought low, but he will prove his greatness. Gavriel joined Battalion 605 during the time of the Syrian Civil War and quickly became an integral part of the unit. Elad, who served with Gavriel in Gdud 605 and then continued with him to Commander's Course, wrote to us the following: Gavriel was the most positive person that I'd ever met, with a smile on his face even during those moments that would otherwise bring you to the edge. At the time, we were serving in the triangle where the Syrian, Lebanese, and Israeli borders meet. When we were down and the going was difficult, Gavriel would smile at us and empower us with an inexplicable energy to continue our missions. We had life-enhancing experiences, and we gained a great deal of operational experience with numerous proactive missions in order to keep the Israeli border safe. After Gavriel completed his commander's course, he returned to the northern borders and led numerous missions on the other side of the border, and although he wasn't an officer, he was appointed as a commander of a stronghold and received the Outstanding Soldier Award of his entire battalion for his service on the northern borders. As long as I'm mentioning that Gavriel did not become an officer, I would like to share this additional story that reflects his honesty. Gavriel did receive an invitation to officers' training school. As part of the process of seeking officer candidates, they ask your fellow soldiers who they most see as officer material. Gavriel was unanimously selected. The final stage before starting officer school is an interview with a psychologist. He recounted to me that the psychologist asked him regarding the Batman vs. Superman movie premiere incident, whether Gavriel was sorry that he broke the rules or only sorry that he got caught. Gavriel wasn't certain what answer the psychologist expected to hear, but he decided to tell the truth. He was sorry that he got caught, even if Batman vs. Superman wasn't a very good movie. The truth was not the answer the psychologist wanted to hear, and as a result, the IDF missed out on someone who would have made an amazing officer. Because Gavriel's mistakes also made him great. Gavriel didn't fear making mistakes because he learned from them. Gdolat tshuva shezdonot na'asot lo kizchuyot. I read a mother's eulogy of her son who fell in battle in Gaza. She spoke of how every moment of his life, every choice and action that he made was the realization of all their dreams for him. Who he was spiritually, the values that he exhibited, how he honored his parents, his commitment to Torah study, everything. She continued that from the day the child is born, every parent has aspirations for that child, and that the entire life of their son who fell in battle was a perfect fulfillment of their hopes and aspirations. That wasn't my and Jennifer's experience with Gavriel. Gavriel was always an amazing son, brother, and friend, but if I had to describe his path in life, I would quote Tehillim, Evin ma'asu habonim haita lerosh pina. The boulder that the stonemason discarded will become the cornerstone. Not to say that Gavriel wasn't the perfect fulfillment of our hopes and aspirations, but it is important for me to point out that he didn't reach his success via the path we had envisioned for him. Sometimes he chose his path and failed, but he always learned from his failures. And sometimes he chose to pause on the way to explore before continuing onward in his journey. As Jennifer continuously reminded me, we encourage, we don't kill hope. The tools that we have as parents are setting a personal example, transmitting our values, sending our children to institutions that reflect our values, and so on. But in the end, your child will lead most of his life apart from you. He will have to make it on his own, contend with the risks and weigh the benefits, and hopefully make the right choices. Inevitably, he will make mistakes, as we all do. Gavriel's friend Hadar wrote to us this story. Although I also heard the D'Angelo Russell story personally from Gavriel, I never fact-checked the details because the message was what was important to Gavriel. Hadar began, "One time, I was really upset. Nothing I did worked out. I was desperate and feeling like a huge failure. I came to Gavri for comfort and advice. He consoled me with this story from the NBA that took place in 2016. Once upon a time, there was a rookie player in the NBA by the name of D'Angelo Russell. He was only 19 years old when he started to play for the LA Lakers, his first team. He could not fathom his new life. Until very recently, he was playing college basketball, and suddenly he found himself on one of the most prestigious teams in the NBA, alongside his idols." Gavriel continued, "One day the LA Lakers were playing an away game, and the players stayed the night in a hotel, 2 to a room. Russell shared a room with a veteran player, Nick Young, and by the end of the night, Nick had had too much to drink. Sprawled out on his bed, he started to tell Russell about the adventurous night he had just enjoyed. He bragged to Russell about his conquests in the club, and he went into some detail about some of his exploits. Russell was amazed. He could not believe that a famous player like Nick Young was sharing with him all of these personal details, treating Russell as a close friend and confidant. As Gavriel explained it, Russell grew up admiring superstars like Nick Young, so he recorded Young to cherish the moment and brag to friends that an NBA star would share his secrets with a rookie. As proof to his friends, Russell shared the video with them. A day later, the video went viral. It was all over the news, and the team knew that Russell was the source. As a result, the team shunned Russell. Nobody would even pass him the ball on the court. Russell was devastated and approached the coaching staff, asking to be traded to any other team, even if it was a downgrade. He simply could not continue as a player on the Lakers. Gavriel concluded, "That is the story of how D'Angelo Russell moved to the Brooklyn Nets. And guess what? He was outstanding with the Nets. The Nets had the best season they ever had. Russell powered the Nets to the top." Hadar was confused by Gavriel's story. As she wrote, "After listening intently, I asked Gavri, 'Okay, how is your very long story actually supposed to help me?' Gavriel replied to her, 'Do you want to keep whining, or do you want to be D'Angelo Russell?'" This was an important lesson that Gavriel tried to communicate. Exercise good judgment, but if you don't and mess up, you can recover. You can learn from your mistakes and become stronger. As I said earlier, your child will lead most of his life apart from you. As parents, you will provide many of the tools at his disposal, but ultimately, your child will have to set off on his own and learn life's lessons, contend with the risks and weigh the benefits, make his own choices. Gavriel did just that. Which brings me to the story of Yonah the prophet, whose book we will be reading for the Haftorah of Mincha on Yom Kippur. Hashem commanded Yonah to go to Nineveh to warn its citizens that if they did not repent from their evil ways, then their city would be destroyed. A Jewish prophet was chosen by God to leave Israel and convince a foreign people to mend their ways. He was to be a leader and example, not only to the Jewish people, but to the nations as well. But Yonah was unwilling to perform this direct commandment from Hashem, and instead fled by boat to Tarshish. Yonah was a prophet. He knew he couldn't escape God, but he thought he could somehow evade the presence of God. It is unclear what Yonah's precise motives for trying to escape to Tarshish were, but commentators generally agree that he feared that, in his position as a leader in Israel, succeeding in his mission would somehow endanger his own community. His lack of trust in his own people drove him to second-guess God's commandment. Don't be mistaken, Yonah was God-fearing. He declared so himself when he was confronted by the sailors whose ship he endangered with his presence. Ivri anochi v'et Hashem Elokei hashamayim ani yireh. I am a Hebrew, and I fear Hashem, God of the heavens. But the reality of the situation was that while others were in turmoil, fearing for their lives, he chose to sleep soundly and not join them in their efforts to save themselves. Vayir'u hamalachim v'yizaku ish el Elohav v'yatilu et hakelim asher ba'oniyah el hayam la'akel me'eleihem v'Yonah yarad el yalkatei hasfina v'yishkav v'yeradem. When God hindered Yonah's escape to Tarshish by means of a storm that threatened to destroy the boat he was on, Yonah sauntered down into the keel of the boat and went to sleep. The God-fearing sailors on his ship offered honest and heartfelt prayer, not just a shir hamalot to biyotze, and they made every effort to secure their survival and that of all of their passengers, while Yonah turned a deaf ear to that reality. This is similar to what we are experiencing today with certain segments of the population. They go to sleep soundly at night, oblivious to the peril that our nation is in. Gavriel was profoundly bothered by this. He felt it was unfair and hypocritical that a segment of the Jewish population don't serve in the IDF. Gavriel's fellow soldiers from his time in Yahalom told us that during their mandatory service, Gavriel opposed any additions or chumrot to shacharit that would make the davening longer, because it was unconscionable that while they were elongating their prayer, the rest of the unit was cleaning the bathrooms without them. He was greatly bothered that there are people who feel that they don't need to accept all of the same responsibilities for the state of Israel, but somehow also feel that they are entitled to more of their fair share of the benefits of this state. There are those who believe that the simple act of going to the mikveh before Yom Kippur will somehow cleanse them from their sins, which may be so, but every Jew has to ask himself before immersing in the mikveh, is he a tovel v'sheretz biyado? Is he performing what he considers to be a meaningful spiritual act of cleansing, but is still refusing to acknowledge God's commandments? Is he accepting the obligations of being part of Klal Yisrael, or only the benefits of that membership? When we left the house to go to Gavriel's funeral, both sides of the street were lined with people paying their respects to a fallen soldier and his family. Unfortunately, the segment of the local population that was absent was exactly those who are not willing to make the sacrifice required to protect the Jewish people. Those who choose not to serve mandatory military service didn't even report the tremendous loss of a young fellow Jew from their own city in their newspapers. Recently, the Israeli Ministry of Defense has permitted families of fallen soldiers to have Hashem Yikom Damo, may God avenge him, carved on the tombstones of fallen soldiers, whereas up until now, it was only permitted to have zichrono livracha, may their memory be a blessing. We chose zichrono livracha, may his memory be a blessing, which is also the reason why I am speaking with you today, to share his memory. As Jews who live in the land of Israel and benefit from all of its goodness, we also have responsibilities and risks. We don't depend on a miracle. Ein somchim al nes. We can't expect that Hashem will fight our battles. There is a Talmudic concept, Torah magna umatzla, the Torah protects and saves. But this is mentioned in the Talmud regarding the individual and not the nation. Furthermore, according to Rashi, this protection is only referring to salvation from pain, suffering, and the spiritual peril of the individual. In contrast, the nation must defend itself with practical and, when necessary, military means. Furthermore, on a national level, we cannot ignore the Torah mitzvah of lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Don't stand by while your people are in peril. I have seen this pasuk used figuratively by fundraisers collecting for such things as tuition costs, but it has an important literal imperative that they are ignoring. It is a mitzvah concerning actual life and death. We are in a situation where we don't have enough soldiers, and this risks the very safety of our entire nation. Since October 7th until the end of 2024, Gavriel's Reserve Battalion will have served at least 7 months of reserve duty. These are mostly married men with jobs, wives, and children, but they have answered the call and are not only risking life and limb and their mental health, but also the integrity of their marriages, families, and livelihoods. The survival of the people of Israel is not just a responsibility of the non-religious and the national religious. It is incumbent upon all of us, and I personally cannot fathom how any sector of the population can ignore how much the other citizens of our country are sacrificing daily and continually to callously disregard the plight of their nation. V'Yona yarad el yalkatei hasfina v'yishkav v'yeradem. Just like Yonah, they are resting comfortably while we are in the midst of a life-threatening storm. Gavriel certainly knew the risks of his service. He had been involved in heavy and dangerous fighting since the outbreak of the war, especially so in the days prior to his death. In his final mission, he was under direct fire. Mortars had exploded right next to him, and a tunnel opening had exploded right next to him. The day of his death, he drove out of Gaza for a few hours to bring in more material for their mission. I spoke to him moments before he re-entered Gaza with the team that he commanded. He told me repeatedly how much he loved us, and I immediately understood from his words and tone the danger that he was in. Gavriel loved Am Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael, and like so many of our sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, he chose to return to the battlefront time after time so that we can be free to live as Jews in the land of Israel. I would like to share one last story that we heard from Noam, a friend from Gavriel's engineering studies. Already during the first meeting of our study group, I understood that you were a special person, smart, sharp, and funnier than anyone I had ever met. But often, at the end of each day's study sessions, matters would turn serious, and we would discuss family life, why we chose mechanical engineering, and how we see our future lives. Noam continued, "You always spoke about how your family was the most important thing in your life, and how your true best friends are your siblings. You spoke of how much you wanted to find the right person, get married, and start a family. Not because it was expected of you, but because of how much love and warmth you have to share with them." Noam concluded, "Even then I was amazed how there could be such a person in this world, someone who had everything but just wanted to give. Yehi zichro baruch. May his memory be a blessing. Shana tova, and thank you for listening."
Well, David, I am so touched that you offered all of us those memories and that musar, because there's so much that I can learn from Gavriel's life, so much that I'm sure all of us can learn, especially now as we stand right before Rosh Hashanah, thinking about the idea of Yom HaZikaron, what memories we have made, what our lives are made up of. And one thing which you've told me repeatedly is that you've only scratched the surface. Every time you talk about Gavriel, there are new things that you think of, new stories, and you've spoken about him numerous times and have not had to repeat a story because there's so much there. You might tell me that I'm incorrect in saying this, but I definitely get the impression that he was quote unquote normal in all the right kind of ways. But at the same time, you say, but there's also something very special about him. When I say normal, I mean a regular person who achieved greatness. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's definitely true. Gavriel worked on himself. Gavriel practiced. Gavriel wasn't afraid to put himself out there, to try new things, to risk embarrassment, to put himself in new situations. Gavriel had a tremendous amount of confidence. He wasn't a person with an ego. Normally, I think ego and confidence go together. But Gavriel had a tremendous amount of confidence without the ego problems. He was able to have this unique charismatic presence and draw people in without being intimidating or pushing people away, which was very special.
You know, one of the things that you also mentioned to me just now when we were off the air is that he was 27 when he was killed. And that means that after his regular army service, what's called Sadir, his regular non-reserve army service, there was a lot of time, a lot of living that he did in between his regular army and the end of his life. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that happened in that interim?
Gavriel decided to sort of find his way in life. He traveled, he met new people, and Jennifer was always afraid, he'll be outside of Israel, he'll fall in love, he'll see the easy life, and he won't come back. But Gavriel's time outside of Israel just sort of increased his love of the land of Israel and the people of Israel, and he decided that this was the place for him. he decided that he wanted to go and be an engineer. Gavriel, in high school, he actually got good grades in the end. But the fact is, he never had a goal. And during his time traveling and meeting people and experiencing life around the world, he decided he wanted to settle down, he wanted to learn engineering, and he wanted to make things. He wanted to make the world a better place. He wanted to have a wife and family and raise children.
Something that I found especially touching was when you talked about how close he was to his siblings and how family was the center point of his entire life, how love of all of you guys meant so much to him. Can you give an example of how that was manifest in his life?
My oldest daughter is a software engineer. She was considering choosing relocation outside of Israel. Gavriel heard about this, called her, and said, "What do you mean? That's not the plan. The plan is we're raising our kids together and living in Israel."
It's beautiful. I'm not trying to flatter you, but obviously it takes special parents who can raise their children that they have that kind of love for each other.
Mostly Jennifer.
I also enjoyed very much that line that he said after the story about D'Angelo Russell when he went over to the Nets after being on the Lakers, and the person said, "Why are you telling me this very long story?" And he said, "Do you want to keep whining or do you want to be D'Angelo Russell?" First of all, it's funny. That's the story that he used in order to express that idea. But I like that. Do you want to keep whining or do you want to make yourself into something great?
Yeah, that was Gavriel. Gavriel liked retelling long stories.
I got that feeling. I was going to say that I had a feeling that was a typical. Did he like the NBA?
He loved basketball. Gavriel really loved basketball, loved NBA. You know, guys from his unit were over at the house, and they were saying that Gavriel, whenever he spoke English, because often they had to speak English for whatever reason, he would always do it with a thick Israeli accent. Although Gavriel didn't have any accent in his English, whenever he was with Israelis, he always spoke with an Israeli accent in his English, except when he said the letters NBA.
Let me ask you, what was his favorite team?
The Heat, the Miami Heat.
Why was the Miami Heat his favorite team?
I'm not 100% sure, but his favorite player was Jimmy Butler.
Okay, well, that's why I assume. I want to also ask you about a very important point you said at the end about Yonah Hanavi, when he avoided his responsibility. And specifically, I want to ask you about Kalev ben Yefuneh, the spy who went with Yoshua, the two spies, Kalev and Yoshua, who were the ones who gave the good report about the land, unlike the 10 spies who gave the negative report about the land of Israel. And before we recorded, you also told me that you had a lot of thoughts about Kalev, and you said some of them to me, and it really made me think a bit. I'm hoping you could share some of them with the audience.
I chose to speak about Yonah because the timeliness of the Yonah story to the season we're in. But originally, I considered using the example of Kalev ben Yefuneh. Moshe tells him, Raglim, V'itchazaktim, be strong. You will have pressure on you from all of the macharim with ulterior motives. You will be challenged whether to stay in the Gan Eden of the Midbar, or you have the choice to work the land for your parnasa, which is not the Midbar. It's not man.
In other words, you're referring to the fact that, according to many Midrashim, the Meraglim wanted to stay in the four walls of the Kolel, of the Midbar, rather than choose the hard life of farming in Eretz Yisrael.
Exactly. Or that somehow if the Jews entered the land of Israel and they were all spread out and were able to do their own thing, those leaders would lose their status, would lose their total control over the Jewish people. So they chose to slander the land of Israel. Speak dibat haaretz. And Kalev hears that and he's like, what the what? I don't understand. We can do this. It might be difficult. Some of the things that you said might have a hint of truth to it, but we can overcome. We can handle this. He spoke the truth, but the Meraglim, right after he speaks the truth, they just double down on him and they go a step further. They just get even nastier and they say, Israel is Eretz Ochedet Yoshvei, and they just continue. It reminded me of those attacks that trolls make in the comments when somebody makes a point. They just don't stop. You can make your point, someone can reply, and then somehow it got nasty. They doubled down on their negativity towards the land of Israel. And I like the fact that Kalev didn't need a halacha. He didn't need to make a whole pilpul. He knew the difference between right and wrong. He had an instinctive imperative that, the land of Israel, it's ours. We can do this. He answered God's call. And I want to stress, that's why Kalev is called Avdi Kalev. He knew that God is the master of the universe. He knew intuitively, the mitzvot, this is what I need to do. That's also why I didn't really mention the halachot of Milchemet Mitzvot. I didn't mention that the Chazon Ish and Rav Moshe Feinstein, they have very clear piskei halacha that Bnei Yeshivot, in a time like we are in, have an imperative, have a halachic obligation to join the army. Because, I want to stress that, look at all of the men and women that answered the call, not because they sat around and said, what's the halacha? We're in danger. They ran to the front. They ran to their units. They ran to get their guns. When you're in a situation like this, you shouldn't be in a situation where you think twice. And it's just not Jews. Any country in the world that they're in the danger that we were in, when they were under the attack that they were in, they would immediately answer the call to arms. It's unbelievable, not just on a Jewish level, but on a human level, that not everyone would answer the call to arms.
It's a very, very painful chapter in Am Yisrael's history, that particular point. And I guess we should speak about that because obviously that was something which bothered Gavriel greatly. I'm sure it bothers everyone in this room right now greatly. And as he said, there's a certain element of Seichel Yashar. Forget if you can make some pill-pool about why someone's exempt or shouldn't be exempt. Stop all that. Am Yisrael is being attacked. Eretz Yisrael is under attack. People are being killed, and we need people to defend. Go do it. And the idea that somehow an entire population could exempt itself. And by the way, I understand some people can be exempt. I don't mean that every single person on Yisrael at every single moment, there are reasons for exemptions, but that an entire community could exempt itself. Not some people learning in yeshiva are exempt, not the best learners are exempt, not the people who have the most hatmada, which means they sit and learn the most, are exempt. Everybody's exempt, including people who don't even really learn yeshiva. Full stop. Is, in the words of a friend of mine who's a big Talmid Chacham, he said, it's the biggest Chilul Hashem since Shabtai Tzvi, in his opinion. That's what too many leaders are saying. And it's very, very painful. And I have to say, something which you said in talking about people standing as you're on the way to Levaya, and people were standing there with flags to escort you on the way, and the community that doesn't serve was the one that was conspicuously absent. As painful as it is to acknowledge that, when you said that, my heart skipped a beat, because that is something which Eliza and I have also seen before other funerals. I do not mean that no Chareidi people show up. That is not what I mean. There are some, but by and large, as a community, you can see the absence. There's a lack of identification with Klal Yisrael, this lack of Klal Yisrael consciousness, which is unconscionable, and it's very, very upsetting.
Apropos of what you said, I want to relate to you a story. When Jennifer and I went to the bank to close Gavriel's account after his death, we went into a local bank, and the teller was a very Chareidi woman. We basically said to her, we explained, we're coming to close Gavriel's account. He was killed during fighting in Gaza, and this is what we need to do. And she immediately burst out crying. I mean, as a mother to children, she totally related to us as parents who lost her children. She had empathy for us. And then she turned to Jennifer and said, how could you send him? And then Jennifer said, of course we sent him. What choice did we have? Someone has to protect us. And then later, she asked, when was the last time you saw him? And Jennifer had said, during Hanukkah, he was out for 24 hours. And she said, well, then how could you let him go back? It's a complete disconnect. And let me say, she was totally empathic to us. She was very sad. But the fact is, she couldn't even understand the situation where we would allow our son to go into the army, and not even go into the army to go into battle, and not even go into battle, but to return to battle time after time. It's just not part of their world.
as you said, she was empathic. This is not a bad person. This is a good person. There's a mother who cares. The worldview, though, there's something about it which is just mistaken.
Over generations, they have somehow become so disconnected that they don't even understand. They can't, as I said before, they can't fathom, but it's just not, it's not part of their world. They live in some sort of parallel universe, some sort of Harry Potter world where all dangers and problems can be solved with a spell or a wave of a wand. And that's simply not the world that we live in. We had 6,000 marauders, terrorists, storm over our borders, massacring, killing, raping. There's only one way to stop that, and that's to meet them with force.
Yeah. Before I mentioned, in response to what you said, that Kalev had that seichel hayashar, common sense. And you said, I think correctly, they didn't have to look into a pill pool to figure out whether they should go or not. But frankly, let's forget common sense. Even if you do only look at actual sources in Chazal, and I'll be very, very open about this to our listeners, if you look at the sources, I'm very, very sorry. I simply cannot understand how anyone can read them objectively. How anyone can read them objectively and somehow arrive at the conclusion that all yeshiva students are exempt from military service en masse. I don't understand it. And that's another thing which I learned from your mentioning Kalev. One of the ideas that often is mentioned is that, well, it's spiritually dangerous to go to the army. Let's even assume that's true. Kalev was in a spiritually dangerous situation. He had a command. And he knew that 10 of the spies were bad news. We know this because Rashi says he went to pray by himself in Hebron at the Kivrei Avot in order to say, please save me from the Meraglim. He knew it was a problem, and yet it didn't change the fact that he had an obligation to do what had to be done. He didn't say, well, it's dangerous, I'm going to ignore the divine command. The fact that something is dangerous physically or spiritually does not exempt us from doing that which God tells us we have to do.
I just want to clarify and make clear that I don't see a Chareidi Jew on the street and blame them personally. I don't get angry at a Chareidi Jew on the street. I think it's very much a problem of their leadership. So I don't really blame the individual. It's a group, it's a community. And I think not just a community, they have to take responsibility, but their leaders have to also take responsibility.
David, most of our listeners reside outside of Israel. We have plenty of people who listen in Israel, but the majority are not Israeli. I know that there are so many people outside of Israel who have tremendous love for Israel, who want to do anything they can to help Israel, who believe deeply in what we'll call the Zionist project. And sometimes I think they don't know what to do. They wonder, what is it that I can do? How can I help? How can I contribute? Is there any message you would like to send to Jews outside of Israel who have heard your story today and are moved by your story and the story of Gavriel? Any message you'd like to tell them about what they should be thinking right now?
Yeah, I want to say that Israel is a land full of heroes, full of people who are willing to risk their lives on a daily basis, who come home and then, even given what they know is waiting for them, go back to the front and continue fighting, risk their lives day in and day out. And I would ask your listeners outside of Israel that before they think about donating to institutions in Israel, they should look into the details of that institution. Are those institutions supporting the protection of Israel? Are they supporting the heroes who day in and day out risk their lives so that Israel can exist? Or are they supporting institutions that are creating more division in the land of Israel, are creating a segment of the population who are growing farther and farther and farther from the values that we hold as Jewish?
I think your point is well taken, and Jews both outside of Israel and inside of Israel need to take that into account. Sometimes we hear people say that discussing some of these issues is an attempt to undermine achdut, the sense of unity that we want to have in Am Yisrael. And while I agree that arguing isn't necessarily conducive to unity, at the same time, I think people also misinterpret unity. Unity doesn't always mean everyone agreeing. Unity means we're all looking at the same goal. Sometimes I'm afraid that we can use the concept of unity as a means to bludgeon people into silence. Don't say something which you don't like because that will undermine unity. Usually the people I find who scream unity the loudest are those people who are the powers that be, who want to maintain the status quo. Sometimes we say unity is arguing about it like Hillel and Shammai and deciding what's the right course of action, and it's necessary at times to acknowledge that things are not the way they should be. And one of those things, which is not as it should be, I think is absolutely the fact that the burden of military service is not shared equally. Again, I believe there should be some exceptions for people who learn Torah. I'm not saying that every single person should be in the army. However, the way it is now is simply unacceptable. We have to look, as you said beautifully, at our land as a land full of heroes, and we need more of them.
I think also when people in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, look at Chareidi Jews and the Chareidi lifestyle, they say, oh, that's authentic Judaism. That's what Judaism is. But I just want to say, Judaism is those heroes that say, I am going to risk my life to save the Jewish people. I'm going to come home, I'm going to go back, and then I'm going to raise a Jewish family, send them to Jewish schools, they'll do the mitzvot, they'll learn in Hesder Yeshivot, they'll learn Torah, but also serve in the army. That's authentic Judaism.
I completely agree. These are the heroes. And if I could make a prediction, which I'm not usually one to do, in years and years from now, people are going to look back at this time, this very, very difficult time, and look at Gavriel and his compatriots and those people who answered the call. Those are the people who are going to be the models for Am Yisrael for all time. These are the people that we're going to look at and say, that is what I want my child to be. That is what I want myself to be. A land full of heroes. And Gavriel was a great, great exemplar of that. And I'm so honored that you spoke with me and the audience today and told us some of his story. There's much more to talk about. And also gave some very, very important messages about what we can learn from his life and what we can learn from what he did. And I just am very grateful that you joined me today, David.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share memories of Gavriel.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate it and write a review. Please visit jewishcoffeehouse.com for other episodes of the Orthodox Conundrum, as well as many other great podcasts, including Intimate Judaism, The Maimonides Minute, Chochmat Nashim, The Francisca Show, and Let My People Eat. I'd appreciate it if you go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the Orthodox Conundrum. It takes literally 2 minutes. It's just giving a certain number of stars and writing 1 or 2 sentences. Please like the Orthodox Conundrum podcast on Facebook and join our growing Facebook group, the Orthodox Conundrum Discussion Group, where you can feel free to discuss issues in Orthodoxy in an honest and friendly environment. I hope you'll become a Jewish Coffee House patron on Patreon. Just click on the link in the description of this podcast, and you can get bonus episodes, Jewish Coffee House merch, and more. You'll get special episodes on all sorts of topics that are only available to subscribers, and you'll be helping Jewish Coffee House spread our message of a welcoming, intellectually engaged, and honest Orthodoxy. Just join Patreon. It's only a couple of dollars a month, and you can stop anytime, so join today. Finally, do you have a message that needs to get out? Do you want to promote your business, your organization, or your cause? The best way is by producing a podcast, and Jewish Coffee House can make it happen. I have experience producing hundreds of podcasts, both for myself and for satisfied clients. Whether you want to learn everything you need in one day, or relax and record and let me do the heavy lifting, Jewish Coffee House Productions will work with you to make it happen and make it even better than you imagined. Let me help you today. Write to me at scott@jewishcoffeehouse.com or go to jewishcoffeehouse.com, click on Productions, and sign up for a free consultation. Make your voice heard, promote your cause, sell your product, and engage an audience now. I'm Scott Kahn. This has been the Orthodox Conundrum on jewishcoffeehouse.com.